So in reaction to this loyalty oath, Israeli award-winning academic Gabriel Solomon went as far as comparing today's Israel to Germany in the 1930s, saying, "The idea of Judenrein, a Jew-free zone, or Arab Rein is not new. Some might say, how can you compare us to Nazis?" And he says, "I'm not talking about the death camps, but about the year 1935. There were no camps yet, but there were racist laws. And we are heading forward toward those kinds of laws. The government is clearly declaring our incapacity for democracy." End of quote. Another well-known Israeli, the writer Sefi Rachlevsky, differs on the time frame of the comparison. He says, "The struggle in Israel today is not between left and right, but between Democrats and fascists. Israel is becoming fascist and racist. In a sense, you could say, we are more like not the madness that was in Germany in 1933, but in 1944-45. When they were in danger of losing the war, madness prevented them from stopping." End of quote. After Knesset took a significant step towards criminalizing boycott, it passed a certain committee in the Knesset that anyone calling for a boycott within Israel, a citizen or permanent resident, will be breaking the law and can pay a fine up to 30,000 Israeli shekels, and possibly more. Any foreigner calling for a boycott may be banned from entering Israel for at least 10 years. After this passed the first hurdle in Knesset, many Israelis saw that as a very, very alarming development. David Landau, former editor of Haaretz, a very prestigious newspaper in Israel, actually called for boycotting the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, in reaction to this, quote, "to stand against the wave of fascism that engulfed the Zionist project," he says. Benjamin Netanyahu, the current Prime Minister of Israel, sounded the alarm about the BDS campaign. So it was no longer think tanks and little groups, it's the Prime Minister of Israel, said the following: "The state of Israel is under an attack of delegitimization," again, delegitimization, "by elements in the international community. This attack includes attempts to enact economic, academic, and cultural boycotts. The last thing we need at this time is to be under such an attack," I mean this attempt at a boycott, "from within." What he was referring to is a growing boycott in the cultural milieu in Israel against the settlements, against the colonial settlements. What started with 60 or so playwrights, actors, theater people in Israel, they started a boycott against a cultural center in Ariel, which is a settlement, colonial settlement built on occupied Palestinian territory, and other colonial settlements as well. They called for a cultural boycott of these settlements. A few days after, about 150 Israeli academics came out in support of that appeal, and a few days after, and that is the most important development, and I think it's a threshold in the development of the BDS movement, a historic threshold has been crossed, is that about 150 top American and British playwrights, actors, filmmakers, and others from Broadway to Hollywood endorsed that boycott, cultural boycott of Israeli colonial settlements. Now, at Carleton University or Ottawa, this might sound okay, but this is Broadway. This never ever happened before, that anyone in the mainstream in the US dared to use the B word and Israel in the same sentence. I mean, they just don't do that in the US. So this was a major development for us, that it legitimized boycott as a tactic, at least against the colonial settlements. So to wrap up, I have 5 minutes left. In challenging Israel's oppression, the global BDS campaign does not call for Israel to be treated according to higher or lower standards than those that apply to any other state committing similar crimes and violations of international law. The crucial demand is for Israel to be taken off the lofty pedestal on which it has been placed by the same Western powers that sponsored and justified its creation on the ruins of Palestinian society. Although Israel is by no means the most atrocious offender around the world, it is the only persistent wrongdoer that has constantly been treated as an honorary member of the Western Club of Democracies. with the Holocaust cynically and quite irrelevantly summoned as a smokescreen to cover up this Western collusion. The virtually unparalleled state of exceptionalism and impunity that Israel enjoys today allows it to pursue its apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and slow genocide agenda against the indigenous people of Palestine without any regard to international law. It is worth repeating in this context that Palestinians and Arabs, more generally, bear no responsibility whatsoever for the Holocaust, a European genocide committed against European communities of Jews, Gypsies, Slavs, among others. It is therefore not incumbent upon Palestinians to pay in our lives, land, and livelihoods the price for relieving Europe's conscience of its collective guilt over the Holocaust. And as some progressive Jewish intellectuals have stated recently, never again must always be understood to mean never again to anyone. Western civil society carries a unique responsibility to hold Israel accountable to international law due to the exceptional level of complicity of Western governments in sustaining Israel's system of colonial and racial oppression with your tax money. Deep complicity engenders profound moral responsibility. This complicity, though, should not be seen as merely a function of guilt. It predominantly stems from the Western establishment's hegemonic economic interests, lingering racism, and the belligerent crusade to preserve a system of privilege and exploitation based on might and a monopoly on the tools of mass devastation. Collusion and moral duty aside, the responsibility to promote and support the BDS campaign against Israel also derives from common interest. While the US and other Western states fund Israel's endless atrocious wars and system of apartheid to the tune of billions of dollars every year, millions of children in the West are still left behind in substandard housing, inadequate or non-existent healthcare, poor education, and an establishment that effectively disenfranchises them. At the same time, when the oil, military, and banking industries are aggrandizing their colossal wealth, most Westerners are steadily seeing their civil rights and economic well-being erode before their very eyes, especially in Canada. A progressive transformation in US, Canadian, EU priorities from directing these nations' great human and material resources into wars and imperial hegemony, instead of that, into universal healthcare, dignified housing, a school system that's conducive to learning, critical learning, and reversing the fatal damage to the environment is not only good on its own merits for the peoples of the West, it is also good for the rest of the world, for Iraq, Afghanistan, and most certainly for Palestine. And I'm coming to the end here. The global BDS movement for Palestinian rights represents a progressive, anti-racist, sophisticated, sustainable, moral, and effective form of civil, nonviolent resistance. It's becoming one of the key political catalysts and moral anchors for a strengthened, reinvigorated international social movement capable of ending the law of the jungle and upholding in its stead the rule of law, reaffirming the rights of all humans to freedom, equality, and dignified living. As Desmond Tutu said, we don't need anyone to polish our chains. We want to break the chains altogether. Our South African moment has arrived. Thank you.